Alright, hello everybody, welcome to my opinion and or rant video that I just feel like making because this is something that I'm noticing right now. It's a pattern that I'm starting to notice. I'm going to try and be as brief as I can here because I have my AC turned off so I can record this without any background noise, and boy, that means it's going to get warmer very quickly. Now, what am I talking about? I am talking about Pathfinder, Baldur's Gate, and the accidental romance. What does that mean? Well, recently, I have seen, as Baldur's Gate 3 has now come out in full, I have seen a discussion appear within the Baldur's Gate 3 community that has been a thing within the Pathfinder CRPG community for a while now as well, and it is this idea of the accidental romance. Essentially, in Pathfinder, specifically in this case Wrath of the Righteous, because that's the one I'm familiar with, there are two NPCs, two companions, in the form of Lan and Daerin, who both you can end up in an accidental romance with. And the reason I say accidental is because the game doesn't necessarily make it clear in dialogue when you're being romantic with them, and so at some point you'll trigger a romance scene that you never intended to happen, and then you have to put them down, and usually you barely ever talk to them ever again because of it. And it also heavily skews the way people perceive those characters. For instance, if you're playing a female knight commander in Pathfinder, you can very easily end up in an accidental romance with Lan because Lan, being nice to him and offering to have a sparring match with him will trigger you to be in his romance, which means once you start pursuing a romance with someone else, he'll get upset about it. Now, this completely skews one's perception of Lan as a character, because if you're a male knight commander, he just seems more like a chill, more like a bro kind of guy, if anything else. For me, he always seemed like the sarcastic wingman, essentially, because I only ever played the game as a male knight commander. I wasn't even aware this was a thing, but it's a thing, as I have learned, and it really puts people off of Lan as a character, because you get stuck in this romance that makes him look creepy because he thinks you're now with him because you said he was a good friend and you had a sparring match with him. He considers the sparring match a romance scene, and in turn the game considers that a romance scene. But it doesn't give any clear indication of that. Daerin is similar. If you're relatively nice to Daerin, he's still very forward regardless, and you can put him down pretty early. But if you're still just decently nice to him for a while, flowers will suddenly appear in your headquarters and he'll be propositioning something to you, at which point I had experienced this because you can have this happen to you accidentally as a male knight commander, and so this happened to me and I had to put Daerin down in that regard. So it's not nearly as bad in Pathfinder, but it's the stuff that happened in Pathfinder, those sorts of accidental scenes, they've been turned up to 11 in Baldur's Gate. And I just want to give my opinion on why I think it's like this. And that opinion being, I think it's a combination of bugs flagging people as being in a romantic relationship with a certain character when they're not. Dialogue seems to be the most buggy part of the game in my experience. Certain dialogue flags will occur even though you didn't trigger them, or they won't trigger even though you selected the option to trigger them. It's very bizarre. Sometimes dialogue will repeat itself. Occasionally, I had a situation where I encountered someone, I'm not going to specify, I encountered someone, went through dialogue, fought them, and then after the fight was over and they were dead, they immediately triggered the beginning of the conversation again, so I had to go through the conversation again to exit out of all that. It's very weird, so I think that's part of the factor, especially with Gale. Gale seems to be in a special hot spot for this whole accidental romance flags thing. I experienced this myself, in that I rejected Gale's advance for his little magic trick, which I knew was a romance scene because I had heard about it before. But then, later on in the game, I take a long rest, and I see Gale with a projection instead. And the projection tells me that he needs to meet me for a matter most urgent. So I figure, okay, this must be relevant to his plot, right? No, It has nothing to do with his questline. Well, technically it does, but it doesn't progress the questline. Instead, it is a romantic picnic out in some starry field. It triggered his second romance scene, even though I simply did not interact with him or encourage the romance in any regard. So as far as I'm aware, that's a broken flag. But aside from bugs, I think the other concern is that the game just assumes you want to go down the romance path for any or all of the given characters. Because mind you, every character in the game is effectively bi, including your own. The game effectively assumes that, because even if you're just a nice person to somebody, you will eventually trigger a scene where they try to start a romance with you. You can't just have a conversation with them, try to get to know them better, without accidentally triggering some sort of romantic part of it. Some sort of romantic part of their dialogue. Because at some point, they will try to come on to you. And it's not like part of a conversation, you just come up to them at one point and they display some interest, test the waters kind of thing, and then you can just let them down gently. No, it'll trigger an entire scene during your long rest where they come on to you, and then you have to turn them down after the game has clearly written they have orchestrated this entire romantic scene for you to accept. Otherwise, you look awkward at best and cruel at worst for turning them down. Another example of this for me specifically was with Will. I was just a nice guy for Will. I was just a chill dude. Me and Will were on friendly terms the whole time. Will was one of the few characters I could just be friends with. And then at some point he's dancing and this is starting to trigger a romance scene that I had to turn him down with. I made no indication that I wanted to trigger any sort of romance, but the game orchestrated this whole elaborate scene where it makes you look awkward or mean for rejecting his advance. And that's the problem I see with the writing here, is that you don't get to initiate the romances with these characters. You don't get to choose whether you want to romance the characters or not. The characters initiate the romance with you, whether you like it or not. If you manage to get their approval, at some point they will try to initiate a romance with you and you have to turn them down. The only one that doesn't really do this in my experience is Karlach, and that's mainly because her romance is locked behind her companion quest. Because, well, there are certain things you have to do to protect yourself from romancing her because she's literally on fire. But everyone else, if you have their approval and you're nice to them while talking to them in camp, trying to get to know them better, they will eventually trigger a full-on scene where they try to come on to you. And it annoys me greatly because it means that none of these characters can be your friends. None of them, you can't grow to just be friendly with these characters, grow into a friend relationship with them, or a, wingman, bro, essentially a bromance kind of thing, right? At least in my case, right? I can't have a kind of in-game relationship with these characters the same way that you develop one as Shepard with the Mass Effect crew, Garrus, Rex, Grunt, Miranda, Liara, maybe not Miranda, I don't know. Tali, Liara, I'm just listing off the companions essentially. All of them, you develop an actual friendship with them, and eventually in just a casual dialogue option, you get to choose whether to pursue the romantic path or not. And if you don't, fine. You don't have to. You can continue on your platonic relationship together as just close friends, right? And part of that just comes from the fact that with Mass Effect, they want you to be able to get the character development and the backstory and the relationship build-up with them, while at the same time acknowledging that you might not be able to romance them, physically in the game, because the romances in Mass Effect, say for, Liara, are gendered. So, if you're a female Shepard, you can't romance Tali. If you're a male Shepard, you can't romance Garrus, right? At least unmodded. So, they wrote in the friendship options, essentially, where you can still get to know these characters, get close to them, understand their stories, their motivations, stuff like that, and you still just get to have an actual relationship with these characters without initiating a romance. Their character development is not locked behind a romance, is what I'm saying. Whereas that's how it feels in Baldur's Gate. In Baldur's Gate, it feels like they wrote the romances first, and then the character development in the, the camp dialogue second. It feels like the camp dialogue exists purely as a railway towards the romance, rather than just having the romance as an option within the dialogue, right? That's how it was with Mass Effect. Mass Effect was relationship first, friend relationship first, romance option second. And if you don't take that romance option within the casual dialogue, again, not a full orchestrated scene or anything, just casual dialogue, if you don't initiate that dialogue option, well, then you don't do the romance, and that's it. But they don't really have this option in Baldur's Gate. Instead, the characters themselves, the NPCs, trigger the romances if you've gained their approval enough. You don't choose to initiate it. It essentially takes the choice away from the player and puts it into the hands of the NPCs, which I don't understand why you do that. I guess maybe they were a little caught up in the idea of everyone will want to try a romance path with these characters, because for any game, even vaguely like Mass Effect with its companions like this, naturally people are going to want to know about the romance paths and stuff like that, so maybe they got just really caught up in it, and so they wrote the romances first and then wrote the rest of the camp dialogue as vehicles towards that romance. But either way, it just really doesn't work for me. Mind you, Baldur's Gate, I love this game. I've already hit Act 3 before, and I'm starting a new character. I got this game like almost day one early access, if I remember, like 3 years ago. I've had this game for a while, early access, and I have been hyped to play it in full. And it is genuinely an amazing game. The amount of detail and quality put into every little thing in this game, the amount of choice that is available to you in this game is insane, and I love it. But the relationships with your companions is just one of the few areas where I feel that this game falls flat. And it seems to be because of an over-reliance on the romance paths, rather than just writing the characters to be someone that you can be friends with, you know? Like, again, I call back to Mass Effect because Mass Effect is the best example. It is the best example of it. Like, Garrus is someone you can just hang out at a bar with, right? Like, anytime I play Mass Effect and I'm playing Male Shepherd, Garrus is my bro. Garrus is my wingman. Garrus, we just go out to a bar. He helps me get someone, I help him hook up with a Turian chick, you know? That kind of thing. You can still be good friends with those characters. I feel like I can't be good friends with any of these characters. You can't just hang out with them, shoot the shit with them, that kind of thing. You just can't do it with these guys because the game will assume you're trying to romance them. And I just don't think that works. You know, maybe if they updated or something with new dialogue, or they fixed the bugs regarding certain romance triggers, like with Gale, which Gale, his writing deserves a video all on its own because I really don't like Gale or his writing. The further I progress in the game, the more I don't like his character at all. It is, I don't like it. That deserves a video all on its own. But yeah, either way, that's just my 2 cents on the whole Baldur's Gate 3 romance discussion that I've seen brewing. And I just think it's an interesting thing to discuss because it looks like they've taken the internet's obsession with romancing characters they've put that a little too far into focus. A little too close into focus, rather than just writing good characters first. But yeah, those are my 2 cents on the matter. I think it tries to railroad you into a romance, and so it just absconds the idea of just having a friendly relationship with these characters for the most part. Or, at the very least, you can have a friendly relationship, but not after you turn them down in some of the most awkward and or cruel ways possible. Because wow, the writers can get pretty creative sometimes. Oh boy. But yeah, either way, those are my thoughts on the matter. I just wanted to speak about this because it's been brewing in my brain for a little while now, so I hope you all enjoyed this little rant of mine, and I will see you all later.